When did being a Karen actually pay off? My neighbor has 6 kids and I've never met a single one. The first time they left one of their blackout curtains open, I caught sight of all 6 sitting around the kitchen table eating just chicken and rice, while the parents were eating a turkey dinner. I tried to tell myself it was just a new parenting trend, but over the next few weeks I started noticing other things. The house was always quiet, not a peep. When I tried to make friendly neighbor conversation with the parents, they'd give one-word answers and hurry inside. My best friend said I needed to stop being nosy. Some families are private, she said. Remember the rednecks? They were weird, but their kids turned out fine. But I'd raised 3 kids of my own, and nothing about that house felt fine. It was 2 a.m. when my dog started barking at something outside. I jumped to the window and saw all 6 kids marching in their backyard like tiny soldiers. The father stood watching with his arms crossed while the mother blew a sharp whistle that made them all freeze. Again! Do it again until it's perfect, the father barked. The children immediately resumed their positions and started over. When one of the smaller ones stumbled, all 6 had to start again from the beginning. The next night, I deliberately stayed up to watch. Sure enough, 2 a.m. came and there they were again. This time doing jumping jacks in unison while quietly chanting something I couldn't make out. It sounded like the American Pledge of Allegiance, but distorted. The youngest couldn't have been older than 5 years old. Struggling to keep up, exhausted. I started paying closer attention to anyone who might have seen these kids, which is when the Amazon delivery driver whispered to me, "Those kids scatter like roaches when the porch light comes on. Never seen anything like it." A quick search online showed the parents weren't registered as homeschoolers in our state, despite the kids never leaving the house. I started documenting everything with my phone. One night, I caught them all doing wall sits against the house at 3 a.m., their legs shaking from exhaustion, while the mother timed them with a stopwatch. The next morning, I followed their grocery delivery to see what they were feeding these exhausted children. The shopkeeper noticed me watching and said, "They order the exact same thing every week. 40 pounds of rice, cases of protein powder, and beans. Nothing a kid would want." That Tuesday, I was ready with my camera when I saw headlights approaching. The kids filed into the white van silently. The license plate was conveniently covered with mud. I sat on my kitchen floor for 2 hours, while on hold with 911, until the van returned. Each child walked out wearing a different outfit than before, looking dazed. The youngest was limping. One boy had fresh bruises on his legs that weren't there before. I took a photo of each of their faces and breathed a sigh of relief. I finally had enough evidence to call CPS. They picked up on the 11th ring. "I need someone to check on the family next door. I think these children are being abused." There was a long pause. "Ma'am, we've already done 3 home visits on that house. They're just a strict family. Please stop calling or we'll have to report you for harassment." Well, I was done asking for permission. I waited until I saw the parents leave one morning and snuck into their backyard. The garage side door was unlocked. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. But those kids needed someone to fight for them. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. That's when I saw it. Professional gymnastics equipment in the garage. Medals and trophies lining the walls. A banner that read, "Family Gymnastics, Future Olympics 2040. I crept closer and saw the training schedule taped to the wall. 2 a.m. footwork drills. 3 a.m. strength training. But underneath was another schedule. Punishment protocol. Miss landing is 2 hours of corner time. Crying means no meals. There were charts tracking each child's weight to the decimal. There were bottles of prescription painkillers with all 6 kids' names. As I reached for one of the bottles to read the label, my hand knocked over a stack of training cones. Behind them was a small pink notebook. I instantly knew it was a diary. The first page read, "Tomorrow is weighing day." I drank 3 glasses of water before bed, but I can still feel my ribs through my leotard. If the number is wrong again, it's the black room. Mom says it builds character. I've been building character for 6 months. I don't want any more character. I want birthday cake again. My legs turned to jelly, and I had to grab the workbench to keep from falling. The diary shook in my hands so bad I could barely read the next page. Sally had drawn stick figures of her family with the parents colored in black, and the kids as tiny dots. I flipped through more pages, each entry worse than the last. One talked about practicing on a broken ankle because stopping meant the black room. Another described eating ice to fill her stomach when they missed weight goals. The sound of a car engine outside made my whole body freeze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think straight. The engine got closer and my heart pounded. So hard I thought it might explode. Then it passed by and continued down the street. I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers and started taking pictures of every single page. The camera kept going blurry because my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I photographed the cover, the stick figure drawing, every awful entry about punishment and starvation. 23 pages of a child's nightmare documented on my phone. I placed the diary exactly where I found it behind the training cones, making sure the angle matched perfectly. My legs felt like rubber as I crept back toward the side door. Every sound made me jump, expecting the parents to burst in and catch me red-handed. I slipped out the door and pulled it shut behind me, then speed-walked across their backyard trying to look casual. Back in my own house, I locked the door and slid down against it onto the floor. My whole body was shaking and I couldn't catch my breath. 6 months in a black room for missing a gymnastics landing. This little girl just wanted to eat birthday cake like a normal kid. The diary entries kept replaying in my head and I thought I might throw up. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 before I could lose my nerve. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. I told them children were being abused and needed immediate help. The operator asked if any child was in immediate physical danger right now. When I said not at this exact moment, she told me to contact CPS for non-emergency situations. I explained about the diary and the black room and the starvation. She sighed and said, CPS handles abuse investigations, not the police. Then she suggested I stop harassing my neighbors before someone files charges against me. I hung up and immediately started uploading every photo to Google Drive. Then I uploaded them to Dropbox 2 and iCloud, terrified they might somehow disappear. The prescription bottles with 6 kids' names on painkillers. The punishment schedule saying crying means no food. The weight charts tracking every decimal point. Sally's diary pages about broken bones and ice dinners and 6 months of torture. Everything needed to be saved in multiple places where no one could delete it. My phone rang and Regina's name popped up on the screen. She was checking if I was okay since I hadn't answered her texts all morning. I told her she needed to hear what I just found in that garage. There was a long silence after I explained about the diary and the black room. Then she said she was coming over right now and hung up. While waiting for Regina, I heard the familiar sound of tires on gravel next door. I peeked through my bedroom curtain and watched the parents' van pull into their driveway. The father got out first and opened the back doors. They started unloading what looked like more gymnastics equipment, acting completely normal. A new balance beam, more mats, boxes of who knows what else. Like they weren't running a torture chamber for their own children. Regina knocked on my door 20 minutes later, looking worried. I pulled her inside and opened my laptop to show her everything. She sat at my kitchen table scrolling through the photos in silence. Her face went white when she got to Sally's diary pages. She kept shaking her head and covering her mouth with her hand. When she read about the broken ankle training, she pushed the laptop away and said she might be sick. She admitted she should have listened when I first brought up my concerns. We sat there trying to figure out what to do next. I had broken into their property, which was illegal, but these kids were being tortured. Regina said we needed a lawyer before doing anything else because I could get arrested for trespassing. She knew someone named Sienna Mack who specialized in child advocacy cases. Regina called her right then and left a voicemail explaining it was an emergency. We spent the rest of the day going through all the evidence, making sure everything was backed up properly. Regina helped me organize the photos into folders with dates and descriptions. We made a timeline of everything I'd witnessed over the past weeks. The 2 a.m. training sessions, the grocery deliveries, the silent van trips, everything documented in order. That night I couldn't sleep, just kept thinking about those kids next door. At exactly 2 a.m. I heard it again, that sharp whistle cutting through the darkness. I grabbed my phone and crept to my bedroom window, making sure to stay hidden behind the curtain. All 6 kids were in the backyard doing jumping jacks in perfect unison. The father stood watching with his arms crossed while the mother held her stopwatch. The youngest one, probably 5 years old, was struggling to keep up with the others. Her little arms could barely make it above her head anymore. Then she collapsed, just crumpled onto the grass like a rag doll. The father yelled something I couldn't make out, and all 6 kids had to start over from the beginning. I held my phone steady against the window frame and recorded everything. The exhausted children doing endless jumping jacks, the parents standing there like drill sergeants, the little ones struggling to get back up. 15 minutes of footage showing exactly what happened in that backyard every single night. My phone started buzzing at 6 a.m. with a call from Sienna Mack. She'd stayed up all night reviewing the evidence I'd sent her. Her voice sounded tired but determined when she told me we had enough to force CPS to act. She warned me that the parents might file trespassing charges against me for entering their garage. I told her I didn't care about getting in trouble if it meant saving those kids. She said she was going to file a formal legal complaint with CPS that morning. She'd attach all my documentation and threaten legal action if they ignored it again. She hung up and got to work while I made coffee with shaking hands. 2 hours later, someone knocked hard on my front door. Through the peephole, I saw a police officer standing on my porch. My stomach dropped as I opened the door to Officer Carissa Thorne. She explained the parents next door had filed a trespassing complaint against me. She needed to take my statement about entering their garage yesterday morning. I invited her inside and told her everything from the beginning. I showed her the photos on my laptop of the training schedules and punishment protocols. When she got to the diary pages, her whole face changed. She read Sally's words about the black room and missing birthday cake. Her jaw got tight and she grabbed her radio to call for a detective immediately. She told dispatch this was now a potential child abuse case requiring immediate attention. Detective Boyd Guerra showed up within an hour in an unmarked car. He specialized in child abuse cases and had seen too much in his 15 years on the force. Officer Thorne briefed him quickly while I pulled up all the evidence on my laptop again. He sat at my kitchen table going through every photo and video with careful attention. He asked me detailed questions about dates and times while taking notes in a small notebook. Officer Thorne went next door to speak with the parents while he continued reviewing everything. Through my kitchen window, I watched her knock on their door. The father answered and immediately started gesturing angrily when she explained why she was there. The mother joined him and they both stood in the doorway with their arms crossed. I could hear raised voices but couldn't make out the words from inside my house. Officer Thorne came back 20 minutes later looking frustrated. The parents were claiming I was a disturbed neighbor who'd been harassing them for weeks. They insisted their children were elite athletes in training for the 2040 Olympics. They said the kids loved gymnastics and were following a professional training program. They threatened to sue me for defamation and harassment if I didn't stop spreading lies. Detective Guerra listened to Officer Thorne's report without changing his expression. He made a phone call to someone at the courthouse about getting an emergency warrant. He explained what he'd seen in the photos and videos I'd documented. Within 2 hours, he had a signed warrant to search the house. He called in a full team including social workers and medical personnel. 3 police cars, an unmarked van, and 2 CPS vehicles pulled up outside. I stood at my living room window watching everything unfold. The officials knocked on the door and showed the warrant to the parents. The father's face turned red, but he stepped aside to let them in. The parents stood in their driveway with their arms crossed while the team entered. They looked defensive but not scared, like they thought they'd done nothing wrong. More vehicles kept arriving, including someone from the district attorney's office. Neighbors started coming out of their houses to see what was happening. The search went on for over an hour with officials going in and out. I saw them carrying out boxes of documents and bags of evidence. One officer was taking photos of the gymnastics equipment in the garage. The social workers went inside to examine and interview the children. Then everything changed when an ambulance pulled up with its lights flashing. My stomach dropped as I watched paramedics rush inside with stretchers. They brought out 2 of the younger children strapped to the stretchers. Both kids looked so small and weak under the white sheets. The paramedics were moving fast, checking vitals and starting IVs. One of the children wasn't moving at all. The parents tried to follow the ambulance, but officers held them back. Regina had come over when she saw all the police cars. She stood next to me at the window holding my hand tight. We watched as the other 4 children were led out to separate police cars. They looked confused and scared, blinking in the bright sunlight. But there was something else in their faces too. Maybe relief. The oldest boy kept looking back at the house like he couldn't believe he was leaving. The social workers wrapped blankets around the kids even though it wasn't cold. Each child was placed in a different vehicle with a social worker. The parents were now arguing loudly with Detective Guerra in the driveway. The father kept pointing at my house and yelling about lawsuits and false accusations. The mother was crying, but it looked more like anger than sadness. Detective Guerra just stood there taking notes and letting them vent. After all the children were gone, he came back to my house. He told me the 2 youngest were being treated for severe malnutrition and dehydration. The medical team found signs of old injuries that hadn't been properly treated. All 6 children would be placed in emergency foster care while the investigation continued. He said my documentation had been crucial in getting the warrant so quickly. Without the diary photos and videos, they might not have had enough evidence. He took my official statement and said I'd probably need to testify eventually. For now, he advised me to avoid any contact with the parents next door. The father suddenly broke free from the officers holding him back and started running straight at my house. His face was purple with rage and his fists were clenched tight. Detective Guerra sprinted after him and grabbed him by the shoulders just as he reached my front lawn. The father tried to shove past him, but Guerra planted his feet and wouldn't budge. They struggled for a few seconds before 2 other officers rushed over to help. The father kept pointing at me through the window and shouting something I couldn't make out. Guerra pushed him back toward their driveway while speaking into his radio for backup. The mother started screaming so loud the whole neighborhood could hear her. She was yelling about how I'd destroyed their family's Olympic dreams and didn't understand dedication. Her voice cracked as she insisted the children wanted the training and loved gymnastics. She kept repeating that they were building champions, not abusing anyone. The officers had to physically restrain her when she tried to follow the police cars with her children. That's when a pickup truck screeched to a stop in front of their house. A man who looked just like the father jumped out with his phone already recording. This had to be Ralph Duran, the brother Detective Guerra had mentioned. Ralph started shouting about constitutional rights and government overreach while filming everything. He got right in the officers' faces with his camera, demanding badge numbers and threatening lawsuits. He kept yelling that this was America and parents had the right to train their children however they wanted. The police ignored him and continued securing the scene while he followed them around recording. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang with Sienna's name on the screen. She told me all 6 children were being placed in emergency foster care immediately. Medical exams would happen within the next few hours to document injuries and malnutrition. She said the youngest 2 were still at the hospital but stable. The other 4 were being processed and would go to separate foster families tonight. She warned me to stay inside and avoid any confrontation with the parents or their relatives. That evening around 6, I noticed bright lights outside. 3 news vans had pulled up on our street with their satellite dishes already extending. Reporters were knocking on every door trying to get someone to talk about what they called the House of Horror. I watched from behind my curtain as they set up cameras pointing at the neighbor's house. One reporter stood in my driveway doing a live broadcast while gesturing at both houses. My doorbell rang constantly for the next hour. Each time it was a different reporter asking for just a quick comment or my side of the story. I didn't answer any of them, remembering what Sienna had said. She'd called again to specifically warn that anything I said could hurt both the criminal case and my own legal situation. The reporters kept coming back, leaving business cards in my mailbox and notes on my door. Some of them stayed until almost midnight, broadcasting live updates even though nothing new was happening. Regina texted me that the story was already trending on social media with people calling me both a hero and a snitch. The next morning at 7, Detective Guerra knocked on my door with updates. The children's medical exams had revealed old fractures that never healed right, severe vitamin deficiencies, and clear signs of prolonged sleep deprivation. The youngest girl had stress fractures in both feet from excessive training. All 6 kids were underweight for their ages and showed signs of chronic exhaustion. He said criminal charges would definitely be filed within the next 48 hours. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecutor was already building the case. He asked if I'd be willing to testify when the time came, and I said yes immediately. Around noon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Samir Tucker from CPS, the same person who'd dismissed my reports before. His voice was quiet as he personally apologized for not taking my concerns seriously. He admitted they'd failed these children by not investigating properly. He said there would be a full internal investigation into why 3 separate reports were ignored. He kept saying he was sorry and that policies would change because of this case. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I just felt relief that someone was finally admitting the system had failed. 2 days later, I watched from my window as police cars returned to arrest the parents. They were both in handcuffs this time, being read their rights as officers led them to separate vehicles. The charges included multiple counts of child abuse, child endangerment, and torture. The prosecutor had reviewed all the evidence and decided to pursue the maximum charges possible. Their bail was set high because of how systematic and severe the abuse had been. The judge considered them a flight risk since they'd hidden the abuse for so long. Within hours of the arrest, Ralph Duran was at the courthouse posting his brother's bail. He'd started a social media campaign claiming this was government persecution of a dedicated athletic family. His posts were getting shared thousands of times with people who'd never met these kids defending the parents' right to train them. He set up a fundraising page for their legal defense that raised $20,000 in the first day. People were calling them victims of an overreaching nanny state and attacking me online even though my name hadn't been released. Ralph posted videos of himself outside the jail talking about how Olympic athletes train hard from young ages, and this was no different. The next morning, Sienna called to tell me she was filing a civil suit against CPS on behalf of all 6 kids. She explained that 3 dismissed reports showed a clear pattern of them not doing their job, and the kids deserved compensation for what they went through. The lawsuit would seek money for therapy, medical care, and education for each child. She'd already started the paperwork and said CPS would have to answer for why they ignored multiple reports about the same family. 2 days later, a court officer knocked on my door and handed me papers. My stomach dropped when I saw it was a summons for the trespassing charge the parents had filed against me. I called Sienna right away, and she told me not to worry because the prosecutor was already talking about dropping the charges since the evidence I found probably saved those kids' lives. She said to just show up to court and let her handle everything. That same week, I started getting updates from different people about how the kids were doing in foster care. One foster mom told Sienna that the oldest boy wouldn't sleep in his bed and kept trying to do exercises at 2 in the morning. Another foster family said their kid kept asking permission to eat and would hide food in their room. The youngest girl apparently didn't know how to play with toys and just sat them in perfect rows. Years of that training didn't just go away overnight. Detective Guerra called me 3 days later, asking if I could testify before a grand jury about everything I saw and documented. He said my photos and timeline were crucial for proving how long the abuse had been happening. The grand jury would decide if there was enough evidence to formally charge the parents with crimes. I agreed immediately, even though the thought of testifying made me nervous. The hearing was set for 2 weeks away. Meanwhile, Ralph kept posting online about government overreach and how his brother was just trying to raise champions. His followers were getting more aggressive in their comments about me, even though my name still wasn't public. Then one morning, I went out to my car and found a note under the windshield. It said, "Families who stick together survive, and families who get torn apart never forget who did it." The handwriting looked angry with deep pen marks that almost tore through the paper. I knew it was from Ralph even though he didn't sign it. The next day, there was another note saying some people don't know when to stop interfering in other people's business. I took photos of both notes and called Officer Thorne, who said she'd increase patrols on our street. She came by that afternoon to collect the notes as evidence and said Ralph was being careful not to directly threaten me. But this was still harassment. She started driving by my house every few hours and parking across the street for a while. Ralph left 3 more notes over the next week, each one talking about consequences and people who destroy families. Officer Thorne built a file on each one and said if he kept it up, they could arrest him for stalking and harassment. The grand jury date arrived and I sat outside the courtroom for 2 hours waiting to be called. My hands were shaking as I walked in and saw 12 people sitting behind a long table. Detective Guerra was there along with the prosecutor who asked me to describe everything I'd witnessed. I started with the first time I saw the kids eating rice while the parents had turkey. Then I told them about the 2 a.m. training sessions and the van with the covered license plate. When I got to the part about finding the diary, I started crying. I couldn't help it when I read Sally's words out loud about not wanting any more character and just wanting birthday cake. Several jury members looked horrified as I showed them the photos of the punishment schedules and the prescription bottles with all 6 kids' names. One woman covered her mouth when she saw the weight tracking charts. The prosecutor had me go through each photo slowly and explain what I was seeing. The whole testimony took 3 hours, and by the end, several jury members were crying too. 2 days later, Detective Guerra called with the news. The grand jury had indicted both parents on 27 counts, including child abuse, child endangerment, and torture. That last word hit me hard because it meant they understood this wasn't just strict parenting. The parents would have to stand trial for what they did to those kids. Around this time, Sienna told me that Sally, the girl who wrote the diary, had been placed with a special foster family trained to help severely abused children. The foster mom reached out through Sienna to tell me Sally was slowly starting to talk after weeks of being almost silent. She said Sally drew pictures constantly and had started eating small amounts of regular food instead of just rice and protein powder. It would be a long road, but she was making progress. The prosecutor met with the parents' lawyers and offered them a deal. If they pleaded guilty and gave up their parental rights forever, they'd only get 15 years in prison instead of potentially 40. Sienna heard from the prosecutor that both parents refused immediately. They insisted they hadn't done anything wrong and that training future Olympic athletes required sacrifice. They actually believed they were good parents who were just misunderstood. Their lawyer tried to convince them to take the deal, but they wouldn't budge. They wanted a full trial where they could explain their training methods and prove they were just dedicated to their children's success. 2 days later, I found another note from Ralph tucked under my windshield wiper when I went to get the mail. This one was different from the others because it actually said what would happen to me if I kept testifying. He wrote that people who destroy families sometimes have accidents and that I should watch where I walk at night. I immediately called Officer Thorne, who came right over and looked at the note with her gloves on. She said Ralph had finally crossed the line from harassment into actual threats, and they could arrest him now. Within 3 hours, 2 police cars pulled up to Ralph's house, and I watched through my window as they put him in handcuffs. He was shouting about his rights and how I was the real criminal, but they just kept walking him to the car. The judge denied him bail because of the direct threats and his history of leaving notes at my house. Meanwhile, the case was getting attention from local news, and gymnastics programs all over our area started changing their rules. The gym where my daughter used to take classes sent out an email about new oversight policies they were putting in place. They said coaches couldn't be alone with kids anymore, and parents had to be allowed to watch all practices. Other gyms started requiring background checks for all staff and limiting practice hours for young kids. It felt like something good was coming from all this pain, even though those 6 kids were still struggling in foster care. 3 months passed with lawyers filing papers back and forth, and meetings I wasn't allowed to attend. Then Sienna called with big news that made me cry happy tears for the first time in months. One of the older boys had agreed to testify about what happened in that house. He was 14, and had been doing better in his foster home where they let him sleep past 5 a.m. for the first time in years. The prosecutor said his testimony would be huge, because until now they only had physical evidence and my witness statements. Having one of the actual victims speak up changed everything, and made the case much stronger. 2 weeks after that, the mother's lawyer contacted the prosecutor with an offer. She wanted to testify against her husband in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her lawyer said she'd been controlled and abused by him too, and was ready to tell the truth about everything. The prosecutor was careful about the deal, and made sure she had to tell everything she knew with no holding back. The father went crazy when he found out and fired his expensive lawyer right there in the courtroom. He stood up and said he would represent himself because nobody else understood what he was trying to do. Detective Guerra pulled me aside after that hearing and said when people fire their lawyers, it usually means they know they're guilty. He said they want to control the story themselves instead of letting lawyers tell them what they can't say. The pretrial hearing started and the father got his chance to speak for himself, which was a total disaster. He stood up in front of the judge and started talking about how champions need to suffer to be great. He said regular people didn't understand what it takes to create Olympic athletes, and that his methods were proven. The judge kept telling him to stick to legal matters, but he wouldn't stop talking about training schedules and mental toughness. Finally, the judge cut him off and said this wasn't a platform for his theories about child rearing. He told the father to sit down or be removed from the courtroom, which made the father's face turn red with anger. Around this time, I got a message through Sienna from Sally's foster mother that made me tear up. Sally had been drawing pictures in therapy and asked if I was the nice lady who helped her and her siblings. She wanted to thank me, but wasn't ready to meet yet because she was still scared of adults she didn't know. Her foster mom said Sally was making progress, but still woke up at 2 a.m. expecting to train. The actual trial started 6 weeks later, and the first day was brutal to sit through. 3 different pediatricians testified about the injuries they found on all 6 kids during their medical exams. They showed photos of old fractures that hadn't healed right, and bruises in different stages all over their bodies. One doctor started crying while describing the malnutrition, and said in 30 years she'd never seen kids that age with such severe vitamin deficiencies. Several jury members were crying too, and one woman had to leave the room when they showed the photos. On day 3, it was my turn to testify, and I sat in that chair for 6 straight hours. The prosecutor had me go through everything from the first time I saw them eating rice to finding the diary in the garage. The father stared at me the whole time without blinking, like he was trying to intimidate me with his eyes. I kept looking at the jury instead, and told them about the 2 a.m. whistles and the weight charts and Sally's diary. When I read her words about not wanting any more character, the whole courtroom went silent. The defense tried to make me look like a nosy neighbor who didn't understand athletics, but the evidence spoke for itself. Then came the mother's testimony, which was even worse than anything we'd heard before. She took the stand in a gray suit and started talking in this quiet voice about punishments we didn't even know about. She said when kids cried during training, they had to stand in a freezing cold shower for an hour. If they complained about being hungry, they had to do 500 push-ups before getting their rice. She talked about something called the black room, which was a closet with no light where kids stayed for days at a time. She said the youngest one spent a week in there for refusing to do a backflip, and came out so scared she wouldn't talk for a month. The prosecutor asked her why she went along with it, and she said her husband convinced her it was the only way to make champions. She said he showed her articles about Olympic athletes who trained since they were babies, and made her believe American kids were too soft. By the time she realized it was abuse, she was too scared of him to stop because he said he'd take the kids away. The jury members looked sick as she described making the kids stand on one leg for hours until they collapsed. She admitted to giving them prescription painkillers without proper doses to keep them training through injuries. The father tried to object several times, but the judge told him to be quiet or be removed from his own trial. The father stood up anyway and started talking about how American kids are weak and how he was creating warriors who would bring glory to the family name. The judge had the bailiff escort him back to his seat while the jury watched with disgusted faces. His lawyer looked ready to quit right there in the courtroom. The father kept trying to interrupt witnesses for the rest of the trial and had to be warned 12 more times about outbursts. On the last day of testimony, he demanded to take the stand against his lawyer's advice. He sat in that witness chair for 3 hours, talking about training methods and discipline, and how the children were lucky to have parents who cared enough to push them. He showed zero understanding that what he did was wrong, and kept insisting the kids would thank him one day when they were champions. He said the black room made them stronger, and the food restrictions taught them control. He actually smiled while describing the punishment schedules and said crying children just needed more discipline. The prosecutor barely had to ask questions because the father kept digging his own grave with every word. Several jury members were shaking their heads, and one woman looked ready to throw something at him. Even his own lawyer put his head in his hands when the father said breaking a few bones was worth it for greatness. The jury left to deliberate, and we all waited in the hallway for 3 days while they went through everything. I paced that courthouse floor until I knew every crack in the tiles. Regina brought me coffee and sandwiches, but I couldn't eat much. Other people from the neighborhood showed up to wait, including the Amazon driver who'd noticed the kids acting strange. On the third afternoon, the bailiff called us back because the jury had reached a verdict. My hands were shaking as we filed back into the courtroom. The foreman stood up and read guilty on every single count against the father. 27 guilty verdicts that each carried serious prison time. The mother was found guilty too, but on lesser charges since she'd cooperated and testified against him. The father's face turned purple and he started yelling that the jury didn't understand excellence. 2 weeks later, we came back for sentencing, and the judge didn't hold back. He called the father a monster who tortured innocent children under the cover of athletic training. The father got 40 years in federal prison with no chance of early release. He'd be almost 90 before he could even think about parole. The mother got 12 years but could get out in 7 with good behavior since she'd helped the prosecution. She cried when they read her sentence, but the father just stared straight ahead like none of it was real. After the sentencing, the prosecutor told me all 6 kids were officially free for adoption, since both parents lost their rights. 2 of the older boys wanted to stay together, and so did 2 of the girls. The youngest 2 would go to separate homes since they needed special attention for their delays. Sienna said good families were already interested, and the kids would have real homes soon. Over the next few months, our whole district went through major changes because of this case. CPS fired 3 supervisors who'd ignored the reports about that house. They brought in new leadership and created new rules about taking multiple complaints seriously, even from the same person. Every CPS worker had to go through new training about recognizing abuse that hides behind athletics or education. Sienna didn't stop there and filed a lawsuit against CPS for failing those kids. She argued that ignoring 3 separate reports caused months of additional suffering. The case went on for almost a year, but she won big. Each child got a trust fund that would pay for therapy and school and anything else they needed. The settlement was enough that they'd have support all the way through college and beyond. The county had to pay millions, but Sienna said maybe now they'd listen when people reported abuse. 6 months after I first found that diary in the garage, Sally's foster mom called to ask if I wanted to meet her. Sally had been asking about the lady who helped and was finally ready to say thank you. I drove to the supervised visit location with my heart racing. Sally was sitting at a small table drawing with crayons when I walked in. She looked up at me with these huge brown eyes and stood up slowly. Then she walked over and wrapped her arms around my waist and whispered 2 words that made everything worth it. Thank you. That was all she said, but it was everything. Her foster mom told me Sally was doing better every day and had even started eating birthday cake again. Around the same time, the prosecutor called to say they were dropping the trespassing charges against me. He said while I technically broke the law, my actions were necessary to save lives. No jury would convict me, and pursuing charges would just waste everyone's time. He actually thanked me for not giving up when everyone told me to mind my own business. Regina and I decided to use everything we learned to help other kids. We started a neighborhood watch program focused specifically on child welfare. Every month we held meetings to teach people the warning signs of abuse and how to document concerns properly. We brought in Detective Guerra to explain how to report things so police would take it seriously. We made flyers with CPS phone numbers and websites where people could report anonymously. Within 6 months, we had 50 members and 3 other neighborhoods started their own programs. Detective Guerra told me at one of our meetings that this case completely changed how they investigate abuse reports. They created a new policy where multiple reports from anyone would trigger automatic investigation. They also started taking concerns from neighbors and delivery drivers and anyone else more seriously. He said they called it the Palermo Protocol after Sally's last name. He told me that 4 other children had already been helped because of the new system. The father tried to appeal his conviction from prison, but every court rejected it. His brother Ralph got 5 years for witness intimidation and lost custody of his own kids who went to live with their mom. The mother started writing letters from prison apologizing, but the kids' therapist said they weren't ready to read them yet. A whole year passed before I got the letter that made me cry happy tears for the first time since this whole mess started. Sally's adoptive parents wrote to tell me she was doing great in therapy and had just celebrated her first real birthday party with a huge chocolate cake and 10 friends from her new school. They included a photo of her blowing out candles with this massive smile on her face that I'd never seen when she lived next door. The therapist had told them Sally was making incredible progress and had even started taking dance classes because she wanted to, not because anyone was forcing her at 2 a.m. The other 5 kids were doing just as well according to the updates Sienna sent me every few months. 2 of the older boys had actually chosen to join their school's soccer team, and their foster parents said they loved it because practice was at normal times, and the coach gave them snacks and water breaks. One of the middle children had discovered she loved art and was painting these beautiful pictures that her new family hung all over their house. The youngest was finally gaining weight and had learned how to play like a normal kid instead of marching in formation. Meanwhile, Ralph got sentenced to 5 years for all the witness intimidation and harassment he'd done trying to protect his brother. During his trial, it came out that he'd been planning to start his own gymnastics program with his 3 kids using the same methods his brother had used. The judge made sure he lost custody permanently, and his ex-wife got full rights with a restraining order to keep him away. About 6 months after the trial ended, the house next door finally sold to this young couple with 3 kids who were the complete opposite of what I'd gotten used to. Their kids played in the backyard every single day, making all kinds of normal kid noise like laughing and yelling and crying when someone didn't share. The parents would sit on the deck drinking coffee while the kids ran around with water guns or played on a trampoline they set up the first week they moved in. Sometimes I'd hear them having tantrums about bedtime at 8 p.m. like regular kids do, and it made me smile every single time. One afternoon, I got a package with no return address that turned out to be from Sally through her therapist. Inside was a drawing she'd made in art therapy of a bright yellow sun shining over a house with all the windows and doors wide open and flowers growing in the yard. Her therapist included a note explaining that Sally wanted me to have it because I was the person who opened the door to let the sun in. The drawing is framed on my wall now right next to a photo of my own kids. All 6 of those children kept working with their therapists and hitting milestones they'd missed during all those years of abuse. The therapists said their resilience was incredible and that they were relearning how to be kids at their own pace without pressure or punishment. Some of them had setbacks and bad days, but they were getting the help they needed to heal. I still wake up at 2 a.m. sometimes out of habit from all those nights I stayed up watching and documenting. But now when I look out my window, all I see is peaceful darkness and quiet houses where kids are sleeping safely in their beds. The new family's house is dark except for a nightlight in one of the kids' rooms because they're scared of the dark like normal children are allowed to be. No whistles or marching or exhausted kids doing wall sits while their parents time them with stopwatches. Looking back on everything, I realize being the neighborhood busybody actually saved 6 kids' lives. People can call me a Karen all they want, but sometimes being nosy means you're the only person who notices when children need help, and everyone else is too polite to get involved. Wow, this whole thing really has been a journey. Thanks for sticking around with me through all the questions and wondering. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.